Okay, excellent. Oh, so close. Ooh. Good. Okay, good. Okay, introduction to the Book of Job. Are you feeling blocked by this thing? Yes, Corcoran, are you okay? Ivana, you okay? Okay. All right. So we have to, of course, we're moving into a completely different text. Same author. So I'll make some arguments for that. But it's a very different story, very different. The goal is different in this story. And of course, what I'm going to do right now is introduce the Book of Job, and then we'll talk about how it fits or not within the mother's house context. Okay, so it's very simple. And we might finish a little earlier. We'll see. Okay, so who wrote the Book of Job? So, of course, nobody knows who wrote what, right? For sure. Nobody knows anything like that, just like we don't know if God exists or not, right? So, but tradition says that Moses has written also the Book of Job. So we know that Moses wrote the Book of Genesis. Although like I mentioned, I believe that the first 11 chapters he wove into his narrative. Those were already stories that were being told before Moses was, ever alive. But I believe there's good evidence, right? There's some evidence as to why Moses would have also written the Book of Job. So I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit. So all of you know who Moses is? Is there anybody who doesn't know? Are we good? Okay. So we know that Moses wrote the Pentateuch, right? Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, and so forth. But Job, right? So here's some of the evidence that scholars have gathered to why, he would have written it. I see two main evidence. There's elements in the Book of Job that come from the Egyptian worldview. So you see a lot of influence of Egypt in the Book of Job. And you see elements of the Egyptian natural world. There's a whole zoo in the Book of Job. A lot of animals are mentioned in the Book of Job. And a lot of these animals are found, only in Egypt. So the crocodile and other animals. So, and there's number of, these are some of the elements that point to maybe the fact that Moses would have written it. So let's talk about the Egyptian worldview, because we've talked about the Sumerian worldview, right, as the backdrop for Genesis 1 through 11. But when it comes to the Book of Job and also a lot of the books of King Solomon, there's also a strong Egyptian influence. So I want to talk briefly about Egypt, so we can see that influence there. So two things about Egypt. Strong matriarchal society. The throne was matrilinear, meaning it was through the daughters that the person became a pharaoh. If your mother was in the pharaonic line, you became pharaoh. So what does that tell you about Moses already? That the pharaoh is inherited through the mother. What would that make Moses? For those of you who know a little bit about Moses' life.
Technically the heir to the throne.
Exactly. So he would have been the heir to the throne if he hadn't messed up, right? So there was a pencil or pen, anybody? Okay. So that's the first thing, right? Women also had a lot of rights in ancient Egypt. There was a strong, same thing as in Sumer, right? The woman could divorce, women could own property. There was a very women had really strong positions in that culture. And of course, you have also in Egypt, just like in Sumer, tradition of wisdom, which is feminine, embodied by the woman. Same thing, right? So Isis, right? The goddess Isis is like the equivalent of the goddess Inanna. She's also the goddess of wisdom. So you have the similar tradition that we have in Sumer, right? So if he's coming from Egypt, there's going to be some elements of the mother's house, because Egypt was such a strong matriarchal society, right? And we're going to see some of that. All right, so let's get into Book of Job as mother's house or not. So first of all, when you first read the book, how many of you have read the book? 1, 2, 3. Okay, all of you. Except one couple of you haven't. Okay. So when you first read the book, it doesn't seem like a mother's house book, right? Even me, I had to take a double take, be like, how do I make? Then I started to see it. It's not obvious. So first thing, it's not obvious. It's first of all, male characters. The protagonists are all male, including God, right? So very strong male presence. The women are not that, they're kind of shadowy in the book, it seems, at least. So going down, right, remember the list. So let me remind myself of the 5 elements of the mother's house. Anybody remember? Here we are. I found it. Okay, so male versus female. So yes, strong male presence in the book of Job, including God. Then we have the element of vertical versus horizontal. So the book in Job seems to be very vertical, right? Job is very much, the God in the book of Job is very much an authoritarian figure, at least initially, right? In the prologue, yes? Yeah, okay. Yes, I know. He doesn't stay that way, right? But initially in the prologue, when you read the prologue before Job, begins his whole transformative journey, God is very much an authoritarian figure. Job seems to be fearful of God. He's so fearful that he makes, if you recall the first story where the beginning of the prologue, when his children have a party and Job is so worried. And it's not like that they would sin, it's that they would sin in their hearts. I mean, this is even the intention of sinning, he's like quaking over that, right? He's like, oh, what if they sin in their hearts? And so he's ready with the whole sacrificial, ceremony at the end to cleanse them. I mean, this is a man who is really afraid of God. And this is a God which is the judge, right? And the God which is very much focused on sin and transgression. And if you mess up, Job, you can sense the tension in Job's life, right? He's not relaxed, right? There is a tension running through his life where he seems to be worried that if my children transgress, the consequences are going to be dire, and I want to avoid that. So clearly, strong verticality, right? Authoritarian God, a God who is seems to be very much focused on transgression, at least in the perspective that Job has, right, of God. So, so that's the second thing, right, the element of verticality. So, by the way, there's also no horizontal in the life of Job, interestingly, as those they were connected. Job, I mean, yes, he talks to his friends, but does he listen to his friends? Do you get that? Job is very, I mean, he has family, but do you see him interacting with the members of his family except to make these sacrifices, right? Do you see him talking to his wife? Do you see him talking to his children? Not really, right? Job is a very solipsistic figure. He's very much in his own, very much like Eve a little bit, right? In his own capsule, right? There's not much genuine interaction in Job's life. So even the horizontal element is missing, right? This is a man who's completely disconnected from God, disconnected, there's no communication between him and God either, right? This will come later. So he's not really, he's very much alone. He's very much a tragic figure, right? Kind of carrying the world on his shoulders, but unable to share that responsibility, right? So very, very no, it's vertical in the sense that God is authoritarian, but at the same time, there's not really a connection here or here, right? Very, very solitary figure. Then you have the notion in the mother's house, law versus wisdom, and that brings us, of course, to the notion of God being judge, right? God being meticulous about transgression. So let me go over because I feel like I'm mixing you up. So first point, male character. Second point, Job seems to be, it's vertical because God is authoritarian, and Job seems to be very submissive, just doing what he feels is the right thing to do, very pious, very submissive to the divine authority, trying to do everything that God says he should do meticulously. And then, of course, the notion of law versus wisdom, right? In the book of Job, at least in the prologue, mind you, it doesn't happen later. You have this notion of God being seems to be focused on transgression. At least Job, that is how he's perceived by Job, right? And Job is worried about transgression, and he is very much tense. There's a tension running through him about that. Then we have separation versus integration. And it also, the Job in almost the whole time, very much a family man, right? Focused on his family. You don't see Job, at the city gate, helping the oppressed. You don't see him really interacting with the community, right? Job is very much focused on his kin, on the people close to him. So very much kind of isolated, right? There's not really any contact with the stranger in the book of Job, right? No interactions. And finally, the last point where receiving versus doing, very, very clearly you have in the book of Job striving to be pious in order to attract divine providence, in order to attract divine blessing. He feels he has to work for it, and he's working super hard for it, right? You see that he's making a lot of efforts to do the right thing so that, you know, his children will be spared, or so that he will continue to be dwelling, you know, in a blessed state, right? Okay, so those are the father's house elements. Anything you want to add or subtract or discuss about this first vision we have of the book of, we're going to go into the mother's house elements in a bit, but anything you want to add to this father's house?
What was the last category you said?
So remember, receiving versus doing, temple versus garden, spirituality. He's not in the garden. Job is not, Job is extremely tense in the prologue, right? He's doing for God. He's trying to do, you know, to keep, you know, to be, you know, he's trying to do the right thing and make sure no one is sinning, and he's making all these sacrifices for his kids. You see how he's multiplying actions in order to appease God. You see what I'm saying? That's the doing. Anybody else? Other observations? Okay. Okay, so that's on the surface, however, because there's also a lot of strong feminine elements in the book of Job. And actually, I had not noticed them until I started to look at the book from the perspective of the mother's house. I was like, let me see, is there anything there, right? I was curious. And then I'm like, oh, there's so much. All 5 points actually that we just talked about, we can reverse it and you can see some feminine aspects. So let's go to the first one, masculine versus feminine. Okay, so yes, it's mostly male characters, but there's two very strong moments that are feminine. Anybody remember what they are? Two entries of feminine characters enter, you know, enter the stage. Yes.
His wife tells him to curse God.
Okay, very good. We tend to overlook that because he seems to overlook it, right? He's like, shut up, you know, basically, right? When she says that, he just shuts her down, right? So we as readers also shut her down. But actually something very important is happening there, which we're going to study. So first time we have a female character, he shuts her down. Yes, we're still in patriarchy, but we're going to look at this character and what she actually has achieved. She comes and she tells him, you know, curse God and die. We're going to look at how this statement is actually one of the most powerful statements in the book of Job. And it's one of the most, what's the word? Instigating statements, right? She will actually shift the course of Job's life by that one sentence. We're going to look at that. So very powerful figure here of wisdom, right? She's again, like the women that we have met in the book of Genesis, she is shifting the course of this man's life with one sentence, right? Initially, he doesn't listen, but then you'll see something will happen, right? Okay, so what's the second time you see a woman in the book of Job? Actually, there's 2 more times. What's the second time? Very good. So that's the third time, right? At the end of the books, interesting detail. The daughters appear, they're named. We're going to look at that, right? So we have that. There's a third place where you see the presence of the feminine in the book of Job. Anybody know where they are? And of course, you know, because you took the class from me already. Yes, yes. And what does he compare himself to? You're doing good. You're doing good. The what? And you mean the bird?
Yeah, the bird.
Yes, you're on the right track. So God is kind of, when he enters the scene, he starts talking about a lot of animals, and a lot of these animals are what gender? What? Female. A lot of, it's an overwhelming amount. So why, right? We're going to look at that also. So now God himself, when he's painting his landscape in response to Job's, you know, rebelliousness, is mentioning, over mentioning animals, female animals, giving birth, mothers, right? Okay, why? We're going to look at that too. So you can see how actually there's a lot of feminine, there's a big feminine presence in the book of Job, actually, right? Okay, let's look at the second point. vertical versus horizontal. So it's like I said, right? In Job, actually, there is neither vertical nor horizontal. He's completely alone. This is a character who is cut from God. You don't see him talking to God. There's no relationship with God. He's living with this idea of who God is and working with that idea, but there's not really any, right? Same thing with, he's not talking to anybody. People talk to him, but he doesn't listen. Did you notice? A woman talks to him, shut up, woman, stop being foolish, right? His friends come and talk to him, and again, he's the same. Like, I disagree with you, I don't agree with that. Why are you talking, right? So Job, right, there's no connection, right? And we're going to see how little by little, something will happen that will break him open to connection. Anybody know what that is? What's the best thing that opens it? We saw that with Eve. She also needed to be cut open, right? Needed to be cut open. What cut Eve open for connection? Anybody remember?
Pain.
Pain, right? So here too, the pain he's going through, in a way, is a cut, right? Just like for Eve, which in a way perhaps is allowing for connection, right? The Job that emerges at the end, right, is a different Job. It's a Job that is connected. How? Why? We're going to explore that, right? But just to give you an idea. So here, neither vertical nor horizontal, like the Job. He's completely cut off. If you study, for example, the philosophy of Gabriel Marcel, which I think you must have in my class, right? Did you take philosophy of religion? No. This is the man in despair, right? Who is who is disconnected from his source. And Job, in many ways, he seems very pious and nice, but this is a man who, because he's disconnected really from everyone, God, people, he's playing the role, right, of piety, but you don't sense in him groundedness. You don't sense in him peace. You don't sense in him goodness or wisdom, right? He's just, you sense in him stress, tension, anxiety. That's what I'm sensing in the prologue, right? There's a lot of anxiety there, which tells me there's a restlessness in the prologue, which tells me that Job is not truly connected, right? He's nice. The text describes him. We're going to look at those words, but he's not really connected to, either to God or to, being or whatever you want to call it, right? So Marcel would diagnose Job as being one of those people who are in despair, right? Actually, even though he looks like he's doing well, he's not. Okay, law and wisdom. Okay, so we see Job, as you've all read the text, right? He's going to move from piety to transgression, right? He's very pious, walking the line, doing everything right. And little by little, he starts to cross those lines, right? Becomes more and more rebellious, more and more blasphemous, more and more insolent, right? And we're going to look at that. And he begins to question God. He begins to question what God is doing, and he goes as far as to question who God is, right? This is why, by the way, this book is one of the most read books in the context of post-Holocaust literature, right? After the Holocaust, it's as though the book of Job is telling the story of the Holocaust, and the same questions are arising in the book of Job that were arising in the hearts of men and women who endured the Holocaust, right? Why is God doing this, right? Where is God? And if he was anywhere here, who is he, right? It's the same questions, right? Job is asking, he's not only he's saying, God, I don't understand what you're doing, but what he's really saying is, I don't understand who you are. Who are you? You're not who I expected you to be. I didn't expect this treatment from you. Why are you treating me like this? Who are you really? Are you really? I mean, there's a really terrifying moment in the Bhagavad Gita. Let's go there for a second, right? How many of you have read that text? Okay, good. So you have Arjuna is,
Yeah.
okay. He's talking to Krishna. I
Yeah,
forgot. It's been a long time.
No, it's been
So
a long time.
he's talking to Krishna, and he's trying to fight a battle, and Krishna is helping him and whatnot, right? And at the end, he asked me, reveal yourself to me. Do you remember that revelation? Who else read the book? Y'all need to read your basics here. This is basic, basic human literature, right? So I will tell you, there's an apparition of the God, but it's a terrifying one. When I read the text, I put it down. I was like, this ain't for me. This cannot be right. It was a terrifying God that was full of like bloodthirsty, violent, right? It was a terrifying image of Krishna as the god of death and destruction, right? This is exactly where we are in the book of Job. It's the same revelation. It's a revelation of God. Job thought God was this guy, a nice guy who blesses him, takes care of him, helps him in time of trouble. All of a sudden, he's seeing God as like that, like Arjuna is seeing Krishna, like the true colors. This is for Job, it's like God has turned into a demon, right? In fact, in the book of Job, there is a play on words between the name Job, Yov, and I don't have chalk, so I can't show you. So just write Yov, Y-O-V. That's in the Hebrew Yov. And Oyev, which means enemy. Oyev, you can write any way you want. O-Y-E-V, for example. It's the same root. Oyev means enemy. And in the book of Job, over and over again, this is a word that repeats. He calls God my enemy. So you see the play on word between God as his enemy and his name as Yov, you know, the one who, the enemized one, or you could put it like that, right? So you have Job all of a sudden, it's like, have you ever had friends like that? All of a sudden they turn, like you see their true face. Anybody go through this? I went through this once. I never recovered. All of a sudden you see their true colors. This is something like that. All of a sudden, it's as though Job thought God was this nice guy in heaven helping him, and all of a sudden, oh, wow, right? This demon, his enemy, destroying him. It's exactly the same. So this book of Job is the equivalent, I think, in biblical literature of the Bhagavad Gita in the Hindu literature, right? It's the same, you know, absolutely shocking revelation, appalling revelation of who God is, or at least the way Job is perceiving him, right? So where was I? Yes. So I don't even know where I was with it. Yes. So he's asking the question, who are you? This is the question of the book of Job. And he is appalled at the vision he's getting right now. He's getting the vision. Well, who was the god? Was it Vishnu that appeared all of a sudden?
No. Was it? No, I don't think it was Vishnu.
Because Vishnu is very terrifying, isn't he?
No, I think it was.
It was Krishna, but they're all the same.
The different deviations of it, basically.
Right, they're
yeah.
all the same one, you know, reincarnating over and over again, right? So, but yeah, Vishnu is also quite terrifying, right? As a god. So, but it was Krishna, yes. Okay, where was I? I keep on going back into stick to the biblical text. Okay, so he's asked. So the question really in the book of Job is, who is God, right? I thought you were this, but now I realize you might not be who I thought you were, right? And what's really powerful about the book of Job is that it is only when he begins to question like this that he gets a powerful revelation of who God is, right? God reveals himself. It's as though God cannot reveal himself until we have doubted about who he is, right? As long as we know or think we know who God is, there's not going to be a revelation. We will remain in ignorance. That's why the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, whom we do in philosophy of religion, and I guess Epstein is the only one who's on the same page as me right now, right? So philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, Levinas, said, he was also a post-Holocaust thinker. His whole family died in the Holocaust. And he said something very beautiful. He said that doubt is the royal road to God. It's one of the, it's the road to God. If you know, if you're comfortable, if you think you know, if you're certain who God is, what he wants from you, you way out there with the pagans. Doubt, on the other hand, will open up new dimensions of God, will open up new revelations that you would not have if you were comfortable in your certainties, right? And the book of Job, in a way, is showing us this path, right? Job did not get a revelation until he began to question God, and he began to be troubled and unsettled, and then he received the revelation, right? So we have something there with regards to the how transgression or doubt or, you know, this wrestling with God can actually bring new revelation. So that's wisdom, right? We are in the context of wisdom when we say that. We're not in the context of law. Law is you will find God by acting rightly, which is perfectly good path, by the way. I will never discourage the path of doing right actions in order to connect to God. But this is wisdom literature where we talk about alternative paths. And here, this is the path of transgression, the path of doubt, the path of wrestling with God, the path of being angry and frustrated with God, the path of atheism or agnosticism And the book of Job is teaching us that path can give you a powerful revelation of God if you stick to it, if you take it seriously, right? If your questions are authentic and your anger is authentic, it will lead you somewhere, right? So it's very different than the path of piety, right? Any questions, problems so far, comments you want to add to what I'm saying? Okay. All right. So let's go to separation versus integration. I'm almost done. Oh, this is going so fast. It's like, why did you even cut? It's like, I got it. Y'all need to talk more. Like, I need to make this last here. I have another like 40 minutes. Okay, I'm stopping. Comments. Thank you.
I would disagree with you entirely on the whole premise
Perfect.
of it.
Okay, let's do it. Let's go.
I was very shocked when you said that you think it's hard to find the mother's house in Job.
Mm.
Because
Go on.
I would immediately place it here.
Oh, okay.
Almost immediately.
Go for it.
For one, it's the only book in which God has a conversation with someone. There's no commanding, there's no this, there's
Writing
that. There is, God comes down and has a conversation with someone. He doesn't do that anywhere else.
That's nice. Yep.
Two, this is the only place where people have a theological discussion about God.
Mhm.
True, Solomon writes about it here and there, but he's not having a conversation. He's more proselytizing. He's more
Yep.
talking about it. There's no back and forth. Here you get a much more depth realm of where you can see yourself sitting among Job and his friends and really talking about
Yeah.
it. To me, this is a very horizontal
Horizontal.
way of where there's actual conversation.
Nice,
Not
nice.
that this happened and this happened.
Yeah.
Or this is the ways that something could happen if I was to connect. No, there is explicit conversation.
Very good. Yes, add that to the horizontal one, right? You're right. What did I say? What did I say when I spoke about it? Oh, I talked about pain and come. Okay, great. Let's add this one. He's right. This is a conversation with God and with his friends, and everything is taking place on the level of the conversation, right? It's not commandments, right? It's a conversation, and through the course of the conversation between him and God and between him and his friends, and I will add between him and his wife, something is happening, right? So nicely put. I like that. I like that. Anything else? You lost
Yes.
it.
On interestingly enough, throughout this entire thing, you sit on atheism.
Mhm.
Job never denies God's existence.
That's true. That's true.
He's never an atheist. He's not even an agnostic.
I'm riffing.
He- Yeah.
I can't.
No, I find that's fantastic that Job never, even though maybe it's shoved in his face and all, since God comes down and talks
Yeah,
about the end, so it's kind of hard to say, no, it didn't happen then. But before that, you can easily say that Job says, no, I don't believe in this more. It can't be. This is too much. No, he never goes that way.
You're right. You're right.
He may say that God is evil, God is wrong.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
he never denies
He
that
remains
God
in-
exists.
Yes, he remains in communication, right?
Sure.
So there's doubt, there's struggle, but the communication remains, and I think that's what makes it wisdom literature, right? He doesn't break it off. So yeah, nice. Yeah, I lean towards what you're saying, strongly, right? Absolutely. I was riffing. So, yes.
Because,
Okay.
you know, the whole theme here has to do with reward and punishment. And there's so much that's, you know, commandments that say, do this and you will be rewarded, do that, and you will be punished. This is the whole discussion about, that's not really how life works.
Yeah.
Life is unfair. Why is life so unfair?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what do we
Yeah.
do about the fact that life is unfair?
Okay, good. So this would be in the, let's see, vertical versus horizontal, right? The vertical makes it seem like, oh, if you do this, then that, right? Black and white, this is good, this is bad. And if you serve God, you will be, right? If you keep the
And-
commandments, you will be, blessed. And the book of Job is saying, well, it's not always true.
Structurally, it's very different than all the other books because it starts with prose, couple of prose chapters, ends with prose, but the entire conversation between Job and his friends, their arguments, we call it dialogue,
Yep.
and then between God and this other person, the adversary, Satan, and the other individual, I can't think of his name. it's woven poetry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, you know, it's very, very different writing.
I like that. Yes, the style is poetry. It's not prose. The style of, authority is yeah.
The last chapter.
excellent. So we're going to talk about that when we get in
It's
the
not
outline.
storytelling. All of Genesis.
It's
all-
history,
it's
right? Yeah.
history, Storytelling, confidence.
Nice, nice.
Relationship to the land, all of that.
Mhm, mhm.
It has nothing to do.
That's a very good point. When you get to wisdom literature, you switch from historical prose to poetry, right? And so it's almost telling you have to switch gears here. And we're switching gears, father's house, mother's house, right? That's one of the gears I'm switching. But you're right. A key indication you are in wisdom literature, you are in the mother's house, is that it's going to be in poetry. And if you look at most of the texts that are in the mother's house are poetic books, right? Proverbs, Song of Songs, Ecclesiastes, Book of Job. That's it. Well, Esther is a story, right? I mean, it's kind of it belongs more to fiction than history, seems like. Ruth is a story, right? So we are in a we're not in history. I mean, you could argue that Esther and Ruth are history, but the way they're told, right, is like a story. There's an element there of storytelling. So that's very nicely pointed out that that's one of the ways you know, oh, I'm in the mother's house is poetry. And why is poetry better adapted to the mother's house? I'm curious. Why does the mother's house choose poetry as the way that it chooses to write or to express itself? Let's talk about that a little bit. I'm curious. Yes.
Well, it's open to interpretation.
Nice.
And it's more flexible. It's a way softer demeanor, right?
Yes,
Than
yes.
commandments and
Yeah, you're really
Therefore,
getting this. You're really getting this, Epstein. You're in the spirit. You're in the spirit. Absolutely. Right. Mother's house, poetry, multiple interpretations, right? Meaning every human being from their vantage point can get something out of it. I want to emphasize that because it means that this text can and should be interpreted by anybody. You don't have to be a believer. You don't have to be a Jew. You don't have to be a Christian. You can be anybody. You will be hit by that poetry and you will feel that that poetry is saying something to you. Whereas if you read the rest of the Pentateuch, the laws that are for the Hebrews, is that doesn't apply to me. But poetry always applies to anybody, right? So it makes it's a universal language, right? It makes the text universal. And that's one of the features of the mother's house, is that it is open onto the nations, right? The mother's house loves the nations. Or in Hebrew, the goyim, right? The mother's house is like, yes, bring this goy in, right? But yes.
So even the setting here, it's not among the Israelites.
Exactly, that too,
They're
that too.
monotheists, but they're not they're set in sort of a mythological time, or the time of the patriarchs, it's in the Mideast.
Yeah.
It's not in Israel, they're not Israelites. It's, so it's not particularly identified with a people.
Yes, absolutely. You're right. The Book of Job, you're right. It could be anyone, a Palestinian, an Arab, a Syrian, an Iranian, anybody from the Mideast, right? So it's not typically a Jew, right? It's doing generic things that all patriarchs were doing at the time. So absolutely, right? Again, this is the notion of wisdom literature, which is open onto the nations, meaning the character here could be one of you. One of the nations could be there depicted here. So again, this notion of mother's house. Oh, you guys are really, really, really getting it. Any other comments about what I've said so far? Or perplexities or things you want to add? Okay. Let's go to the fourth point. And you guys already mentioned this, separation versus integration, right? Okay. So here you have Job, of course, seems very insular, right? He's very just focused on his own family, focused on his own kids. There's no other that is mentioned that Job is confronting himself with, right? But you will see that as Job is journeying through this, kind of, how should I put it? Through this dark journey of suffering, right? Little by little, and we're going to talk about this will be the climactic moment, I think, in the book, is how much his mind opens up to include the other. And we're going to see how and where that happens, right? It's not obvious. So we're going to see that as we get to the text. And of course, like what you guys were mentioning, which I didn't put here, the notion that it's in poetry right, means that it's accessible. It's a universal language. It's not history. If it was history, then well, that's just for us. That's our history. But poetry immediately makes the text universal and makes it relevant to anyone who is reading it, no matter what is their background, and can be interpreted differently, right? The text opens itself to multiple interpretations, which is very Mother's housey, right? And finally, yes, the notion that it's not in an Israelite setting. Already the book of Job, right, is already putting us outside of the borders of Israel, right? We're talking about someone who might be from the nations, right? Okay. Great. All right. Last one, doing versus receiving. This one is very interesting in the book of Job. Okay. Oh, here it is. Yeah, I didn't finish talking about Moses, but I'll finish with that. Okay, doing versus receiving. So we know in the beginning of the book, in the prologue, Job is a doer, right? Job is, I mean, you see already he's high achiever. He's very wealthy. He has lots of wealth. He's also very proactive. Spiritually, he's a doer, just like materially, he's a doer. So spiritually, I told you, right? Even if his kids sin in their hearts, he's going to do the sacrifice for them, right? So he's not even letting them do the sacrifice, like, let me do this, right? So very much of a striver, of a doer. And what happens to this doing when he is hit by the tragedies that befall him? What do you think is God doing to this attitude of doing? What happens to that as we read through the book? What do you see? Yes.
I mean, it kind of shows him that he has no control, as in those sacrifices weren't necessarily useless. They just weren't fulfilling the purpose that he thought they were. And so
Exactly.
they're destroyed. The fruits that he thought came from the sacrifices are destroyed. And then even when he's doing nothing to kind of make sure nothing else happens to him, the punishments just keep coming.
Yeah, exactly. From doing, Job becomes undone, right? Write it down like that. It sounds good. From doing, Job becomes undone. God crushes all of his doing. Everything that he worked for, destroyed. He himself unable to do anything, crushed. And Job mentions, I mean, you have this notion in Job of being crushed to powder, right? To dust. It's as though Job is being decreated, right? He's devolving back to dust, right? So you have kind of like God through these waves of suffering is crushing his ability, not only the works of his hands, but he's crushing his ability to do. And what comes out of that? Yes.
He becomes paralyzed.
Yes, completely.
And
Yeah.
he only gets spurred into speaking about his pain. So when his wife talks.
Yes. And we're going to talk about that, right? Absolutely. There's a fundamental role of the woman in the direction of the book, right?
So then he just sits there.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah. I like what you're saying. So yes, he's paralyzed. But what can emerge now from this being undone? What is possible when you realize, we'll see the same idea in the book of Ecclesiastes, by the way. What happens when you lose your ability to do? What does this make room for? What is now possible for Job now that he can't do?
He has to go to receive.
You could say that, right? Absolutely. Now he's like, he's lost control, right? He knows he can't make it happen. And now you have room in a way for grace, right? To receive. Now that I can't do, now that I can't make it happen, I can only receive it, right? And we'll see, of course, what he ends up receiving. And spoiler alert, it's not his kids and his wealth back. This is not what the book is about. We're going to talk about that ending, right? It's a fake ending. Okay, good. All right, any comments? I want to stay 6 more minutes here. So give me something to talk about for 6 minutes. I don't want to leave before 4. Anything that anyone wants to add?
So if we're going to go, I guess, more into details of what happens later on, I think that, yeah, I'm with Charles 100% in that. I think this is like quintessential, like Mother's book text of the Bible, or at least one of them. And I think that's also, you could see that in the conversations that Job has with his friends, or rather that his friends have with him, because he barely says anything in response, if anything at all.
Yeah.
And all of the things that they say to him could be very father's house type things
Yeah.
of, if you're suffering, it's fine, count your blessings. Your suffering in the face of that means nothing. And then when the suffering gets even worse, they say, well, if you're suffering, that means that you must have deserved it in some sense, because we know that God is just, and otherwise you wouldn't be suffering if you didn't
Exactly.
deserve this. And then the third one says, well, forgot that you shouldn't question God, even if the previous two explanations didn't make any sense to you. And then all of these things are, like you said, kind of thrown to the wayside when Job does question God and God
Exactly.
reveals himself
Right.
to him, which is not a squashing. He's not being punished for asking the question. He's being rewarded for asking the question, but he is to some degree being kind of scolded for thinking that the question undermines the authority of God.
Good. Yeah, the friends in a way represent the father's house, right? They're the representatives of the father's house. They're coming with father's house arguments, right? How can you speak like that about God, and you're crossing the line, and you need to be respectful, and God will, surely you've done something wrong. This is why this is happening to you. And Job is resisting, right? He's moving into a different dimension alone, right? He's in a way trying to connect to this new dimension, which we're gonna enter, right? Yes,
I
absolutely.
would argue that Job never does anything, he only reacts. He's never proactive.
Interesting.
Sees his kids throwing a party, he says, must have gone wrong somewhere. He reacts and makes some sacrifices.
Yeah.
He needs something from God, he asks for God, but he doesn't ever say, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and do this. And then we'll see what happens, whatever happens, happens.
Yeah.
He's never like that.
No, he can't take a risk.
He's
Yeah.
always calculating and moving things
Yes.
forward.
Yes. Very good. He's very cautious, very calculating, very scared. There's a lot of fear in Job, right? Which we're going to see in a way God is trying to work, push him out of that, right? There is a weaning here also. Again, this element of the mother's house, where I think God is weaning us, pushing us into the next level, which we saw with Eve and Adam, at least the way I told the story, right? Here too, God, through this ordeal, is trying to push Job into a new dimension, and Job is in a way moving along, right? You can sense he's there is a journey there, which we'll talk about. Okay. Yes, one more.
Seems like the criticism of extreme piety over how you relate to the world and everyone else in it.
Yeah, he's extremely pious, but he has zero connections. And the text is like, how? Right? It's in a way, he's not truly pious, right? By the way, religion, the Latin verb, the Latin root for the word religion is religio, which means to connect. He's religious, but he's not, how you cannot be religious without being relational. And Job seems to think he can, right? So there's no true religion in Job's attitude in the beginning. He's not able to connect, right? And that's one of the things God is trying to work, to work with him on. Okay, anything else? Yes, how do you feel? It looks beautiful, your notes.
It's good. I mean,
Yeah,
it's difficult to like maybe go back and change something.
doesn't it
change
feel
something
different, or don't you feel like free?
a little bit,
A
maybe.
little, okay, see, okay, let's call it a day. So we don't meet on Thursday, right? Monday schedule, we meet on Tuesday. It looks sad, that's nice. Next Tuesday, everything is due, your essay, your test. Any questions on the test and the essay? That's
So what's the essay on?
so I never talked about that. Let's talk about that. So the essay is so as we're looking at these journeys, right? You need to look at your journey as a human being. Where are you at? And you need to pick one idea that really moved you. Is there one thing we talked about where you were like, oh my God, this hit me like right in the heart, right? Because I am struggling with this, or because I was thinking about this, or because this is the middle of where I am right now, right? So I want to hear about you and about this brilliant idea. 50% you, 50% the brilliant idea. You see what I mean? Do you want an example?
No, but does it have to be about things we did before this class, or can it include Job?
Oh yeah, the test is on Genesis.
Yeah.
No Job
How
yet.
about the essay? The
Same
essay.
thing, always. So whatever the test is on, the essay is on. So you don't talk about Job, will be next time. Is it next time? Yeah, next Job. And who are we doing with Job? Who's the second one? I forgot, there's, Ruth maybe, yeah. Okay, so no, just focus on Genesis, right? So that's the essay. And then the test, you pick one question and you bring in as much as possible from the lectures. No other source, please. I don't want to see anything else than what we did here. And that's it. Okay, good.
Thank you.
All right, let me turn this off.